Okay, so let's move on to our first subject and speaker, Martin Hill-Wilson. I'm sure a very familiar face for many, certainly for myself. Just as a way of an introduction, Martin was the CEO of one of the first BPO and customer experience consultancies in the UK. He has really deep experience working with technology, having spent almost a decade in the systems integration industry, and is now, I think, Martin, in your 10th year with Brain Food Consulting. I've personally had the pleasure of hearing Martin speak on many occasions, so super excited about also hearing him today. And also his subject as well is I think AI enablement in workforce management is very topical. It's very, very current. And I'm sure we'd all agree that AI is already transforming the way that we work and live our lives, from very, very subtle things like, for example, automated text responses on our smartphones, through to more grand uses more recently, for example, with track and trace and COVID. But what about workforce management? Well, I guess we're about to find out. Just before I hand over to Martin, just a little bit of housekeeping. So Martin's going to start with a short presentation to help set the scene. And then following that, we're going to set aside about 30 minutes for a Q&A fireside chat. As Martin presents, think about the questions you'd like him to answer, and then please type them in the chat here on the webinar. At the end of the presentation, then choose a few from the chat to ask, as well as some questions that have been asked prior to today when you registered. If your question gets chosen to be asked, Shiva will give you the mic, and then I'll just ask for a brief introduction to yourself and then voice your question. So, without further delay, Martin Hill-Wilson, over to you.
Thank you very much.
And Shiva, if you can put the presentation up, that'd be great. Thank you.
There we go. Fantastic. So, thank you very much for being invited to this inaugural event. It's an exciting period of time for a whole number of reasons. I mean, AI, I think, is a transformative technology in the context of contact center activity. I think we're living in uncertain and interesting times anyway, even without that as being a stimulus, in terms of the reliability of what's taking place within our contact centers. And if you sort of combine those two things together, I think we're in a period of really quite unprecedented change, not just through the lens of resource planning, but generally, what it means to be running customer service and what customers expect from us, and indeed trying to chart a path forward. And I really do think that we've probably got to a new place, as far as the way in which we're going to architect the way that we run our customer service. And I just wanted to run through some ideas with you to get the conversation going. It's really not vendor specific. It's more to do with the general trends in the marketplace and what's happening. And of course, AI is not just being infused into resource planning. It's been infused into contact management, into performance management, and really fundamentally starting to change the way in which we operate and we do our call centers. So let me just make sure. Shiva, have I got ability to drive my slides? Oh, there we go. Of course I do. Thank you very much. So the first thing I'd just like to go through very, very simply is talking about AI from the perspective of what it is, because I find it's one of those terms that everyone talks about but don't necessarily use. And when I first started getting into this about 3 or 4 years ago, found these kind of definitions fairly useful. So if I could have another slide, please, that would be useful. Thank you. So here's a way of looking at AI, and to my mind, AI is not so much a single technology, it's more a category. And at the bottom there's quite a useful way of thinking about this. It's really it's a set of technologies which are really very diverse in modality, the ability to see, listen, speak, move, reason, decide, etc., etc. But most importantly, it's all about learning from past experience. And as you can see, there's an awful lot within there, things like natural language, speech, vision, for example, that are very relevant to the delivery of customer service. And one of the ones that have probably been most ubiquitous and common is machine learning. or deep learning if you want to look at it, and in particular the little hint sitting there in the top left-hand corner, the ability to predict. And that's what really is the most single important and interesting thing. And just moving on to the next slide, thank you. The machine learning part of it, if we just move on one, is really boils down to the following point. Whether or not you can, you like to get into the techie side of it, the big news for us really is that its ability to be able to deal with vast amounts of data. And as a general statement, contact centers are still no less about what's going on than do know what's going on. There's an enormous amount of operational data that we generate minute by minute, and we tend not to know what's going down there. But the ability to be able to train algorithms to be able to spot patterns and therefore to be able to predict is the transformative contribution that machine learning makes to our ability to run our contact centers. And again, if we can just move on, Shiva, to the next thing, we can now start to predict in ways we couldn't do before. One really exciting thing that's happening in terms of the interaction component of customer service is the ability to understand intent earlier than later in a conversation. I'll come back to that in a second. The ability to be able to estimate and understand demand in a much more granular way, and I think that's very much a point for this conversation. The ability to be able to understand and predict outcomes, and also the ability to understand things like next best actions, which can drive self-service, it can drive agent assist, etc. And the fact that we can do this in a highly automated way and therefore enable both customer and frontline staff and team leaders and site managers to fundamentally work in a different way. It's beginning to move our model from a reactive one to one that is increasingly proactive and front-footed. And if we could just move on, thank you. That's what we're beginning to see in terms of our contact centers. And by way of sort of giving you a slightly broader context, this is one piece of work that certainly the pandemic has demanded of everybody, which is that we can't simply rely upon live service, and in particular voice-based live service. We've really got to drive self-service and proactive. And this kind of model is increasingly seen, in people such as the Amazon product, the Google product, people such as Genesis, etc., where there is an ability very early on in the conversation through natural language to spot a customer intent and therefore make automated decisions around is it best served by a live assistance, or is it sufficiently simple and non-complex that we can actually deliver it through self-service? And the ability to do that at scale is driving our self-service and changing, by the way in which we're using live assistance. The fact that the pandemic has really given us a very strong push towards digital first agendas means that contact mix is taking place at a highly accelerated pace, certainly relative to the previous period. And I think one of the contexts for the discussion about resource planning is, where does this take us over a couple of years? What is the ideal mix? And for the sake of discussion, I think that possibly live assistance, if you've completely optimized it to just be about the emotive, the complex, and the loyalty, crunch moments in life, maybe that's no more than 25% of total inbound, in which case you've got a completely different way of looking at resource planning and probably a quite different skill base, at the back end of that. Now, as I said, people are still getting to grips with this. The leading cohort of organizations are beginning to get into this and using it intelligently, and as a result, they're finding that they're able to position their live assistants in a much smarter kind of a way. Thank you. If we can move on to the next slide. And just to show you very quickly, and this is pertinent to our particular point of interest, skills-based routing has really been the default way in which we've done that. And as you well know, that's simply another way of saying, we've got this number of people, they've got the following capabilities, let's on that basis now simply send people to them. And it's been a relatively simple model to be able to manage. Now, have a look at this. There is a ton of data that we can take, both from real time, but also from historic and even third-party data, which we can mash into the decision on how we do routing. Much more sophisticated. And that's a signal that AI is capable of utilizing a much broader data set to automate our decisions. And the similar thing, I would predict, is beginning to enter into the world of resource planning, where there's a much richer set of data that we can build into our models through this automation that machine learning provides us with. So if we can move on, thank you. Here's one thing, and by the way, the key thing for me is that this slide came from a presentation of AI in customer service about 4 years ago. So this is not bleeding edge by any stretch of the imagination. USAA is certainly a very progressive organization over in the States. It's the one that concentrates on serving the armed forces, by the way. So they have a very strong sense of looking after their membership. They have a very progressive agenda. And just look at this. So back then, they were looking at the opportunity for AI to look at up to 7,000 different factors around a customer behavior, which they'll have collected in their data bases, and they'll have collected from third party, in order to simply be able to predict, you know, how and when and why a customer is going to get in contact with them. So already you can see that the leading edge organizations are using the ability that machine learning introduces to take vast amounts of data and use it intelligently for a quite qualitatively different outcome. Thank you. And here's the question. You know, if you take the implications of that, how does that change the ability to forecast demand? And one of the points I want to make to you today is that AI, probably machine learning mainly, the contribution it's going to make is not just being added into the system that you're most familiar with using. Yes, it will certainly be infused into resource planning, into forecasting, into real-time management, but because it's also being added to other parts of the contact center infrastructure, that is also opening up new data sets that previously you wouldn't have had an opportunity to use. And again, in a time that I'm not entirely clear of, but in the shortish term future, I would imagine that this kind of data will be pushed through into the resource planning part of it, particularly for organizations that are using unified, you know, single ecosystem type platforms where everything is fused in quite strongly together. So in other words, what we're using for routing data may also become another input for you in terms of resource planning. Thanks. Let's move on. So really, again, what we're being promised here is the opportunity for smarter forecasting and smarter scheduling. There'll be a few of you out there that like to geek out in terms of which of those particular approaches to machine learning is most useful. I'm not going to get into that right now, but again, one of the things, it's a question of picking and mixing the right kind of algorithmic mix. Thanks, let's move on. So let's now start to zone in on the topic of the day. The essential message is that models can take in many more factors that can affect forecasting than you can possibly do with the current systems and your own personal experience and expertise as a team. I've just given a couple of examples there. I inferred a whole number of them before, and I think probably an ongoing conversation that as a community you're likely to be having is, as you start to get up to speed with these systems, you know, what is actually a useful data input? How can we get these things plugged in? And how does that affect the accuracy of our modeling? And indeed, what kind of decisions can we pass back to the business as a result of it? And that's a kind of a clue, I think, also in terms of the value that collectively as a team you can contribute back to leadership in customer service. Thanks. Let's move on. So here's one practical thing, and again, I hasten to add that this was something I found probably a couple of years back with one of the vendors speculating openly about how they were starting to experiment with algorithms and what impact, you know, it could make. And I think one of the things that you saw in the routing, which was significant, is that the system was able to deal with this in real time. And increasingly, generally speaking, we're moving from historic into real-time data management in contact centers, and that is absolutely significant. You know, we still fly blind a lot of the time in terms of really knowing what's taking place, and we rely upon reports which are generated after the event. increasingly we're looking at a world in which we can see things in real time and respond to them in real time. Now, a proportion of those can even be automated. It's not even necessarily going to require human intervention. Some people still like the opportunity to have human in the loop, and that's absolutely understandable. But we're going to have a mix going forward of automated decision making in real time, as well as being handed off in terms of alerts, because let's say the pattern of behavior is now different. It doesn't conform to the patterns that we've been used to, and therefore you want to escalate that to somebody to make a decision about. But nonetheless, the idea is that we're able to work in really quite compact periods of time and make quite significant changes to the way in which we organize things. Thanks, let's move on. And just to meditate on the broader picture here, I think that this is one way of summarizing the reason that there is so much untapped data that takes place within a contact center environment on a daily basis. I mean, if you think about it, there are all types of customers. And again, an open question, how many customer personas can we actually recognize in today's world? Or is it just a customer? We kind of know that some people prefer text than voice. That's probably about as far as we've got. But, have we broken that down to the half dozen personas that maybe, digital marketing people understand? And I think that that's going to become more and more frequent and more common. Right now, for example, we know that some of the older cohorts have significantly changed their customer behavior since COVID, simply because they've had to go online. They've got more digitally competent. So again, how does that translate into the way that we would like to serve them? So different kinds of customers, all the different types of topics that they are pushing out to us, all the different channels. And again, that's a very volatile scene. As I said, voice is not disappearing, but text is certainly growing. Everything from chat through to messaging. Social has grown significantly at the end of the day, and there's also a case being made for video these days as well. We've all gotten used to these kinds of sessions that we're doing right now. And then of course there's outcomes, both in terms of what it matters to the customer, and then what matters to the advisor, and what matters to the business overall. And if you look at that, and that data set that's being generated real time, how much of that do we actually know and can skim off in terms of management reporting? And the answer is not a great deal. Increasingly, machine learning will be able to spot patterns as far as that's concerned, and be able to contribute to, again, this movement from reactive to proactive. And the key question, of course, is how much of that is relevant to workforce management? And I think it's a useful debate to have, which is, even if that hasn't necessarily been plugged in yet into the operational systems that you're currently using, that is the potential. And you can rest assured that most people who are building this capability on their roadmaps will be thinking in these kind of broad terms. So it's good as an industry to be considering this in the round and saying, actually, knowing it will turn up eventually, what else could we get hold of, and what are some of the most significant things that we would like to understand? For example, outcomes. The difference between a first time and a second or even third time resolution is a function of what topics, which channels, and maybe what types of customers. Because if you know the answer to that, that is going to change your assumptions around the volumes that are required in the future. And it's a very simple one. So let's move on. Thank you. So moving forward, this is just a holding slide. If we just move to the next one, what are some of the things that we're beginning to see, in the future? Well, the first one, which I really don't know the answer to, you know this much better than I do, but I would imagine that things have changed considerably since the pandemic first came through. And from the research that I've been involved in, certainly there isn't a common pattern. However, some organizations have sustained more demand. Some people have actually seen sustained less demand. Some people have seen demand being quite volatile and changing, over time. And depending where you are in the world, we've either got another lockdown. Some of us have local domestic issues called Brexit, for example, which again might fire up a whole new set of, inbound demands, etc., etc. There is volatility, and the core question is, to what extent the current patterns of behaviour, rest upon previous historic ways of looking at it. Now, it might be that most historic assumptions are completely busted. And that's, I think, one of the most interesting things about machine learning, which is to rapidly accelerate our view of patterns of behavior. And it might be that we have almost a pre-COVID and a post-COVID set of data to work from in terms of our working assumptions. Anyway, there's a thing for debate, historic versus real-time assumptions. Thanks. Let's have a look at the next one. And the other point to be made, which I have said in different ways so far, is that I do see that there is a significant transformation taking place. Now, this particular picture, which simply summarizes the percentage of inbound that is delivered via live assisted service, whether or not that's voice or text, versus self-service versus proactive, is in the process of changing. It depends on the marketplace, it depends on the country, and the use of modalities is certainly dependent upon region. But I would suggest that we are, for the first time, significantly moving away from using people as the primary way in which we deliver, through necessity and also through the rise of things like conversational AI and a massive push that we've had towards simplifying journeys and the whole effort around a digital transformation, which certainly the pandemic has kick-started in many organizations. The result is we will see a reduction of live assistance, but also an upgrading, which I think we've already recognized, of the type of conversation. They're going to take longer, they're going to be more complicated, they're going to be more valuable at the end of the day. As a case in point, do you consider digital labor to be something that you're responsible for as much as live labor, if you want to think of it in those terms, or is that outside your remit? That might become something which is an interesting debate in the future, because certainly a considerable amount of that self-service will be delivered through what you might call digital labor, i.e. bots or virtual assistants. Thank you. Next slide. And just to make the point, this is a US perspective. We are beginning to see change in channel. So on this particular one, graceful decline, but not an eradication of phone. And interestingly, phone has come back being a particularly important channel for vulnerable customers. That's a comment that I've heard made quite recently and quite frequently, that it's certainly not on the way out, but we have seen also a growth in other channels. Interestingly, although some sectors do not like email, it continues to be persistent as a channel. Notice the growth there in video chat. Also notice the fact that we are a mobile first society, and therefore mobile chat, as much as mobile apps, has seen considerable growth according to this, and also the growth in chatbots and or in self-service. So we're beginning to see a significant amount of non-growth, which leads me to a question: how well are we doing our resource planning around of all modalities, and how successful are we at being able to make our conclusions about resource requirements? It certainly becomes more like a 3D game of chess as opposed to a relatively simpler one, in which is primarily voice with a few more extra channels, and that trend is not going away. Thanks. Let's hit the next slide. Yes, this is a continuous build, so if you want to just keep building this as I sort of talk it through, this is just research from, again, a European footprint. If you want to keep hitting the slides, the builds, that would be great, because there's just lots of stuff on the slide. Shiva, if you could just hit the next one and the next one and the next one. There you go. Just keep punching those things through. Thanks. So basically, there's loads and loads of growth that we see in new channels, and that's going to be replicated pretty much, across the world. Thanks. Sorry, and one of the things to make about that, which is very important, is whether or not, therefore, the system you're operating on is single or multi-channel. In other words, are you really operating as an omni-channel capability, in which case you've got much greater flexibility to move people through different modalities, and that's more efficient as far as resource planning, or are you still stuck with essentially separate siloed queues and separate siloed channels? Again, that's going to be a major difference in terms of the way you have to do your resource planning. Thank you. Let's move on. Sorry, I've just made that point. So again, the different efficiencies assumptions around of omni-channel versus multi-channel. Thank you for that. Let's move on to the next one. And here's another interesting one. So this is Vodafone talking about their chain fundamental transformation and operating model. And again, this is, I think, typical of the way that people are looking at their digital transformation. They've already made a lot of progress this year, but it's going to continue through the next 2-3 years, moving from fundamentally a live voice-based environment with complex manually based sort of middle and back office to increasingly ones built upon machine learning predictability, probably delivered primarily mobile first, probably delivered through conversational AI, with an associated transformation of contact frequency and also a transformation of the cost to serve. So again, people are at different stages in that journey, but that's a major trend which is going to impact the way in which resource planning takes place. Thank you. Let's move on to the next one. And then the other thing to be talked about, that's fine actually, is just very simply, you know, we're trying to move back now from working from home to some degree to working in the office. Some of us can and can't do it, but it's going to be a hybrid model that most of us will settle into, which then raises the next question on the next slide, which is again, how have we managed to deal with productivity in the home working environment? And if we could just see the next slide, that would be appreciated. Thank you. It's not been easy working from home. They're not ideally set up. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done to professionalize the home working environment. It has been more stressful, and mental health well-being has certainly been top of the agenda, and therefore there has been some impact on productivity. How are we factoring in those assumptions looking forward? Thank you very much. So just last couple of slides and then we're done. So finally, what does that mean for the profession? There's these kinds of slightly scary predictions that talk about the change of work, you know, the impact of AI overall. And put simply, the easy, known, repetitive stuff will certainly become automated. You know, it can even be RPA as opposed to full-blooded, you know, intelligent automation. But even when we get to the place where humans are still very powerful around creativity and complexity, you will probably notice also that we will be assisted with some form of AI to help make our jobs simpler, you know, in the future. And in terms of the profession and where we're going to, I think we will see a change in what we're focused upon. Some of the more simple stuff will be automated, but the decision making will still be required and the expertise will still be required. And if we move to the next slide, please, as a prediction, I would assume that, you know, where we're still looking to is the fact that human expertise possess general intelligence, much more sensitive to real world contexts, and therefore with the increased amount of data that machine learning is able to surface for us, it's still going to require a layer of interpretation from human beings. Now, I think that also, if you then combine that with the other data sets that I was talking about from other parts of the business, I think that starts to model and change the way in which resource planning happens. I think there's a likelihood of it working together probably much more tightly with other people across the customer service operation, and probably looking at as much strategic issues as well as just the day-to-day real-time issues, but looking at it in terms of the complete service as opposed to necessarily just as narrowly in resource planning. And by the way, I'm perfectly up for that conversation. If you think that's baloney, I'm completely fine with that. But I do think that there's a change to be had as far as that's concerned. Just a couple and then I'm finished. So very quickly on the slide, just to stay there on that thing, that's perfect. If you look at this is a model I put together about 2 or 3 years ago saying where AI turns up in call centers. I've highlighted the place where it turns up in terms of our immediate interests. But if we do, I think the final slide build, you can see, if you can't already see it, that actually it's incredibly powerful in terms of being, you know, something threaded through all of our activity in contact centers. And as people transform, which they have been doing, to cloud-based and to next generation, again, we're going to see AI being ubiquitous, not just in our areas, but right the way across. And therefore, we're going to see a change, not just in our own organizational activity, but across the piece. So we're part of a much broader change that is taking place. And last slide, and I think that brings us to a close. Yeah, one more after that one, if you would. And there we go. So that's a scene setter. Hopefully I have managed to explain a few things, provoke some questions, and provide the context for our next level of debate. So back to you, Doug, on that basis.
Thank you, Martin. I think that's absolutely fascinating, and I've myself dabbled a bit as well in the real-time automation part, so I know just what's possible. I think that we're not quite there yet, but I think the way that I always think about how AI can meld with workforce management is really in the space of it makes us more agile. So what we can't do with speed, AI can do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's able to operate without a strategy underlining and underpinning it. So it's really, it sort of moves you from being reactionary, as Martin says, to be almost proactive. You building strategies that your AI is then responding to.
Well, I would say that normally that view of life, Doug, I think would be, okay, in the next 2-3 years, we might get round to it. I think what's interesting is that since COVID, there's been a huge acceleration for doing new stuff. So that future is a much more rapidly arriving future than it might have been if this was a typical conference call in a typical year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to move to the question and answer section for Martin. I think we've got some questions actually in the chat already, which is great. If you haven't already, just a reminder, so please do voice your questions there. And if you put your name there as well, so I know who it is, I can then pick on you to call out. Otherwise, I'll be very happy to voice it myself. I think, Martin, if it's okay with you, we'll kick off with one of the questions that we had through the registration, because it is one that you touched on here, but I think it's quite an important one, and one that definitely I've fielded quite many times, as in for all the excitement and positives surrounding AI, I think there's still many elements of cynicism, certainly fear and concern around the technology itself. And should AI, for example, be feared? Will corporations even need a workforce management team in 10 years? I think you touched upon the reasons that they probably do and still will need, but I wonder whether or not you could touch a little bit more on that subject.
So I think there's a mixed bag of impressions that we all have. So AI certainly not anything like the way it looks like in the movies. So most people have to sort of get rid of that impression of AI. And as an analogy, if people are talking about it, I think the people who've got much better expertise than I have on AI would say, okay, if the movies look more like a grown-up person capability, then the current generation of AI is much more like a toddler stroke baby. All right, so that's the first point to be made. It's still very early on. You still, with a machine learning algorithm, have to, feed it data, point it in a certain direction, and continuously nurture it. So it's not like a general capability at this point in time. But interestingly, business is full of patterns which repeat. So once you've lined it up, it's surprisingly useful. So that would be the first point. Second point is there's a huge debate, which I'm massively encouraged by, around the ethics of AI. And I mean, that's a whole space that has opened up. And in particular, it's to do with a topic that we've known for years, going back to BI and CRM, rubbish data in, rubbish conclusions out. And there is a lot of inbuilt prejudice and bias that goes into the way in which we generate data, as experienced by, just take facial recognition as a topic, and various ethnicities are better or worse recognized in those situations, and how do we eliminate those kinds of bias? So there's that whole part of the discussion to be had. Then there's the discussion to be had around the ethics to do with, is it fair to take an assumption about my medical condition and therefore have an algorithm make a decision about my worthiness for a particular insurance policy or things of that nature? And again, that's more, I think, a question of the law being behind a technology and needing to readdress some of those areas. But I feel that people have rapidly, in the last 2 years, caught up with some of those issues and are now pushing very hard to make sure that the right kind of decisions are made around our use of the technology. So that's all to be said. But I would say that I think in a recessionary time, which certainly pandemic has inflicted upon us, many businesses will be looking to reduce or improve their efficiency and the degree to which they use people. And I think what we will see in the first tranche of all of that is getting rid of the low-hanging, common, simple tasks. But who wanted to do that stuff anyway? So, the analogy I have is, if you're a gardener, do you have a problem with a spade digging the ground? I don't think you do. I think you welcome the spade. So in that sense, machine learning is a tool that is useful to us. It simply raises the level at which we make a contribution. So it means our skill, our mindset, our outlook, the definition of our activity gets to change over a period of time as more and more AI turns up. But I think there are very, very few people right now going, apart from let's talk warehousing maybe, that goes, there's only one person to turn the lights out and that's the end of it. So it's AI plus humans for the next foreseeable period of time. And I don't think that the impact that's going to have on us once we've actually seen it is going to be a bad one. And I think most of us will welcome it.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think you touched upon something there which kind of resonates with me as well. Around it moves the need for humans to be more empathetic, perhaps. And actually, that brings me on to another question that was raised in the registration, which probably links to that first question, which is, in this world where we're kind of melding all the say the simplest stuff has been automated through AI. What skills does a workforce management professional, what skills become important for that workforce management professional?
Well, I certainly think that everybody's got to have an uplift in terms of understanding data. I mean, one of the big issues, by the way, with AI is the so-called black box syndrome, which is that we don't know how that decision has been made. And there has been significant progress on trying to make the decision making in it much more transparent. But I think probably over time, legislation and just general people consensus in society will have it that we need to understand why that's taking place. So that will require a certain literacy, I think, around of understanding how our AI helpers have facilitated and enabled a decision, and that we need to have a certain level of literacy around of that. So that would be the first point I would make. The second point I would make is that, as I said before, I think that for a number of reasons, and it's not just this, contact centers are becoming increasingly seen as end-to-end activities. Journey management is an interesting point, looking at that. The collapsing the division, which I think is entirely artificial, between customer-facing teams. You're beginning to see that if you work in an agile business, the so-called cross-functional team is really breaking down those barriers. So again, we're seeing activity in the round as far as that's concerned. And I can't help think that, forecasting as a data-centric activity is going to see much greater opportunities to link into other people who are orientated around the management and decision-making of data. And that's definitely a growth area for the reasons I said. We're going to move from reactive to proactive. I still think 80% of what happens at the operational level is blind to us, like literally an iceberg. We can't see what's going on. As we surface that, and the AI will help us do that, we're going to be in a fundamentally different place. And I think that the resource team will become part of a much more tightly crafted team making those decisions. Yeah,
absolutely agree. Let's take there's some questions that have been raised here today. Okay, I can't see the person asked the question, but this one is, so what lessons can be learned from AI bias when used within recruitment? Amazon 2018, gender bias led to having to switch off this function. Do you think as an industry we are in a better position to fully utilize AI across all areas, or should it be a case of proof of concept prior to full-scale rollouts?
Well, I think as a general point, introducing anything new is better done, in small bite-sized chunks and frequently at a pace, a la agile, as a modus operandi. So that's a case in point. Introduce it incrementally. I'm not entirely, in fact, we should have a debate about this. I'm not sure that the typical data that we're using at this point in resource planning has any significant bias in the way that it certainly does in the cases around of recruitment. In those particular cases, yes, I think, and with, by the way, facial AI and emotive AI and a whole bunch of areas like that, I think we've got to go back to the bit in data science where you look at the data sources and you look at the cleansing of that and you look at how you do it. And there's a fundamental debate going on, really interesting at the moment, between Google, Amazon, and a whole bunch of people going, actually, it's the teams that run it that make the difference. The bias is in the people. So you know, if you go into your D&I, you know, diversity and inclusion kind of seminars and workshops and all that stuff, there is a simple conclusion and that is that, you know, greater diversity lends itself to greater innovation because you have many different perspectives and points of view. And I think that our data science teams need to reflect that as just, it's not a wrong thing, it's just a fact of human nature that we're limited by our own perspective. So if you introduce greater diversity into our data science teams, you're more likely to skip over some of those points, number one. And then secondly, we do have to work much harder at producing genuinely representative samples of the data that then go into building our algorithms, which then feed the decision making, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know the degree to which that's a significant point about resource planning, but I do know that introducing this should be done incrementally, certainly.
Yeah, it's interesting. From my view, the absolute data, I think that actually, I'd even go as far as to say that for the workforce management professional that can't do a little bit of coding these days is probably going to be left behind to some degree, because extracting data and understanding it is becoming more and more critical for in every job, no matter what. Yeah. I also think that this point around the empathy, the ability to harness what we understand as human behavior, and to make it so that we can translate that into something that AI can then respond, is also really, really critical. But you're right. I think in workforce management, typically we deal more with less empathetic subjects.
I'll tell you one thing that I do think is going to change. I mean, I spend a lot of time on the customer journey side, the omni-channel thing and all of that. And I see, you know, again, COVID has really opened up a whole new strand of customer behavior. You know, we've had to adapt. We're seeing much more complexity and variety within the ways in which we're engaging organizations and what we expect in return. I don't see any reduction as far as that's concerned. I see organizations catching up, investing in the right generation, cloud first, you know, blah, 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 blah. That's all going on. To that extent, the world is becoming more complicated. And if I think about it, I'm sure you can't do good resource planning without updating your own understanding of how it's changing in your organization. And I would say, as a practical skill, that you probably really do need to understand what your services are. Now, again, you know, if I say to most organizations, what's your customer service proposition around of what's the easiest way to get my new insurance done? You know, what's the best set of channels? And most people wouldn't even know what we're talking about there. Some people wouldn't even know that they've got omni-channel versus multi-channel. But it's going to have to get better, because otherwise it's going to cost us in terms of time, it's going to cost us in terms of customer experience. So as we gradually get better at all of that, as a resource planner, I've got to understand how it's changing. Because if I don't know what your assumptions are around of what we need for resources. So I think that's a very practical skill that we're going to have to get into.
So just to put that into kind of a visual for everyone, I think what you're talking about here is having almost an AI tool that can present exactly what's happening in real time. So reforecasting, not just the workload, the volume that's arriving from customers, how long things are taking, but also what the workforce are doing, and melding that into a real-time reforecast kind of view.
Well, here's a wild idea. As we standardize a round of journeys, each journey is going to be quite distinct, with its own separate requirements and its own separate resource assumptions. So you may start to end up with what's your resource assumptions for the 4 or 5 journeys we are currently managing in customer service.
Yep.
You know, that's not wild.
Yep. No, that's absolutely true. Yeah, that's true.
So therefore you'll have to understand the nature of that, then the nature of, you know, the complexity of the calls, the degree of success in terms of first-time resolution, the skill base associated with that, the contact mix associated with that. It becomes, you know, a much more precise definition of requirement, which is also then put into this moving target called changing customer behaviors.
Yep, indeed. Okay, just a couple of more questions, Martin, I think, and I've been reminded, by the way, by Shiva that we were meant to do a bit of an introduction of the Global Workforce Management Forum at the start, so I'm gonna give him a little bit of time, otherwise I'll get in trouble. But Yeah, exactly. I've already been told off. But yeah, a couple of more questions just for you. So, one, I think that I've heard this, and this is propped up many times, but this new acronym, workforce, or WEM, workforce engagement management. This often gets kind of mixed in the same subject as AI. Is it the same subject? Is it something different? What is it to you?
My reading, and you'll have to excuse me on this point, I think that often the way in which we have created accountability on resource planning has missed a trick, because all we've been concerned with is producing an optimum model for the number of headcount that we need for the task. And what we tend to forget, as far as that's concerned, is that it involves humans doing stuff, and it involves human psychology. Now, we've always got to deliver the cheapest amount as far as that's concerned, but there's a feeling that I think resource planning has actually succeeded so terrifyingly well that there's been hardly any time at all for development and change and all of those kinds of bits and pieces. And by the way, the modern workforce requires more flexibility, particularly now we've got this option of working from home and all the rest of it. And so as a nominal gesture, I'm slightly cynical here, towards that, we've introduced the words engagement into the thing, as opposed to just optimizing the heck out of it. Now, if you look at the underlying themes there of empowerment, of self-management, of shift, and all the rest of that stuff, and the change in the fact that we're moving from using people to do very low-hanging fruit and getting self-service to do that, then I think that engagement is really the beginnings of a huge cultural shift around the way that we manage people, because the old connection between an engaged workforce delivers great customer experience and all of that connection. It's in recognition as far as that's concerned. And here's my controversial point of view. I think if I was going to try to balance out the competing demands between effective planning, which is a cost consideration, but also the impact that has through people to customer, how about making resource planners responsible for CSAT and NPS scores?
Yeah.
Because then you've got a complete... Then you've got integrity in terms of the planning process. There's my controversial point of view.
Interestingly, I've had that same thought. I saw Colin shake his head there, so I might also ask him later. But the bit that I've always struggled with within resource planning is that we often put KPIs or KRs around service level, but of course, in reality, our ability to be able to directly influence service level sometimes is reliant or dependent upon many other factors that are outside of our control.
Sure.
I've often thought as well, the same thought, that we should all have a common denominator in terms of the same customer experience. The only thing is that, again, a bit like service level, there's just so many different dynamics that play into that space that we don't have.
It's tongue-in-cheek to one degree. It's a collective responsibility, but one thing I would say generally, I mean, I have, if I'm known for anything, it's trying to introduce innovation and new stuff. And one of the most practical things I find in contact centers is that people like the idea of doing some stuff different, but there's no time.
Yeah.
Even though I just take learning and development, even trying to introduce micro learning, it's ridiculous. I mean, there's systems that will count you off theoretical seconds, in order to be able to bank time to be able to do that kind of work. That's insane. That's an insane world that we live in. So we've tightened the screw too tightly as far as that's concerned. So whether or not there needs to be a renegotiation of the truth of around how much you need to build into that, and I think very topical right now, by the way, is well-being. It's absolutely trending. The front line are definitely taking the brunt of a lot of that, and we're likely to be running out of gas fairly soon unless we address that. One of the things that is needed is time to deal with those things and time to do it. So I think that's one of the most practical things right now for us to build in and renegotiate back with the leaders of the business and saying, so what do you want us to build in, and being realistic about some of these things. The development of new skills, because the thing's changing. How much time should we be building into that? Those are the more practical things that we need to do right now. Eric.
I'm conscious of time, and I promise Shiva that I would allow him to do a bit of the introduction that should have been at the start before I was so keen to come straight to you. But Martin, that was hugely insightful, really educational.
I'm sure I've mixed it up, but that's enough.
Yeah, I think if you've proven nothing else, then you've just shown just what a big subject that is. I mean, the slides itself with the whiz through there, it was just shows how many different elements and just how much this is going to grow in our space. But yes, thank you very much, and I'm sorry as well for those that I didn't get able to get in to give a voice, but hopefully you did. Some of the questions have answered some of the things that have been running through everybody's minds here today as well. Shiva, I guess back to you, hand over to do the introduction that should have been at the start. Over to you.
Thanks, Doug, and Martin. Has been a phenomenal discussion. People just loving it. We had 240 registration. Trust me, we have 110 joined, and they're joining, and just a few of them are leaving. But the number is increasing, and your answer to the questions has been phenomenal, and a lot of learning in the process. We're going to record this and share this in our forum. Before we move on to the next session, I'll just to talk about GWFM. Thanks, Doug, taking the responsibility of leading the EMEA chapter. We have chapters in all over the world, which we have set up, and I must thank, and Doug is the one reason for this today's event. I really truly deserves a big round of applause. Can we clap for him? He's the one taking the responsibility to make this event happen. Before that, I would quickly have one poll. How many of you know about GWFM? You just take a few seconds to just click onto the button here and participate. Let's see. Request all of you to participate. 50%, 60%, a few more to go. All right. Okay. I'm already part of it, 20%, only 20% of it. And got to know about it from social media, 40%, majority of them are. And I heard about GWFM, 20%. I don't know about GWFM, so 20%. Okay. I think some kind of awareness which you have created now to talk. Thank you so much for participating in the poll. In fact, just a month back, me and Doug curated this content, and we happened to invite Martin and other fellow distinguished speakers. And also, we thought that this is the best topic to talk about it. So before we move on, we'll talk about GWFM. GWFM is Global Workforce Management, registered in Canada, India, and also in the US. And this is the corporate global university where we create a learning platform and also knowledge sharing, and also professional networking. So we founded this in the year 2015, and we started with a small forum like this, and we didn't know that we're going to grow very big. We've grown up to 20,000 professionals networking platform worldwide, and we are growing day by day, and we're just getting added 50 to 100 people in a day everywhere in our social media and also in multiple platforms. In fact, when we are talking about GWFM, in fact, we are bringing in kind of a thought leadership to the community. We're the first one to dedicate International Professionals Day for WFM. This is on 27th. You may be wondering why 27th. 27th is when we started. We thought that let's dedicate International WFM Professionals Day for all of us, and we all belong to the same community, right? And we got to have a day when we have Engineers Day, Doctors Day, Father's Day, and Mother's Day, Teachers Day. So why don't we have a day for International WFM Professionals, all of us? So we did celebrate since last 3 years. This year has been a phenomenal. We had around 5,000 people participated, and I'm expecting 2021 is going to be much more higher. want to invite all the WFM professionals to be part of it. And we've been doing a lot of education, especially bringing in kind of education in alignment with universities and also with B schools. In fact, we have been doing a lot of things. You may be, I'll share this presentation. In fact, if you click onto this presentation, in the tab of this GoToWebinar, you'll be able to find this in detail. And we do events, like we introduce the WFM and global leaders, CEOs, CXOs. Also, we've been awarding best practices and best tools in WFM. Also, we do publications, magazines, white papers, and also newsletters. Very interestingly, we are bringing up with the maturity model. In fact, that's been my brainchild. I done my PhD in workforce management maturity model. I've been spending more than 5 years' time on that. Soon we're going to bring this out, and maybe by 2021 first quarter it will be up everywhere. And we've been doing upskilling and skilling for the WFM professionals. We are setting up WFM University in the organizations and also the institutions. We do provide WFM consulting, and we have got an innovation center. Any company would want to explore any kind of innovations, we welcome them to participate in our forum, so that we have expertise and experts and thought leaders who will be able to help them out. And you can see the kind of awards that we have been giving away. In fact, last year we had Exaware and IBM and KPMG taken their award for the best practices and also best tools. Recently, we had Sutherland's and also Concentrix for the best practices. And as far as best tools are concerned, NICE and Fusion. So we had around 30 organizations participated in this. I'm sure that next year, 2021, we're going to have much more bigger. And we have the membership open for the corporates and also for the individuals. You can take a look at it and download it from the tool. Also, they can reach out to us if you need any details from us. Let me not talk much about GWFM. Let's connect, let's network, okay, let's learn from each other. Join us on our social media. We're quite open and ready to network, ready to share knowledge, and ready to touch every WFM professional's heart and soul, which is where GWFM makes a lot of difference from other firms. We want to open up a platform for the WFM tools organization, consulting, and also the organizations. So here is where we belong to, all of us, and each one of you belong to the GWFM community. Let's join together, and looking forward to seeing and looking forward to networking with each one of you. Thank you. So with this, thank you so much. Let's move on to the next session. Thank you so much, Doug, for making this in the middle. I think this has been very enticing, very good. And with this, I hand over the control back to you.
Excellent. And yeah, just to mirror what Shiva says, I think the reason that, well, for many of those who know me here will know that I'm very, very passionate about workforce management. And I think that for a long time, we've needed an organization that can help unite the different elements and people across the globe in the same manner as, say, HR and finance have, but something dedicated to help professionalize and help to bring those individuals that have great expertise but not necessarily are speaking to each other. So this for me is the special thing. And Shiva, I think the thing that kind of inspired me more than anything to get involved was Shiva's passion as well. And this is the thing, by the way, that I see more than anywhere across so many different professionals, is that passion. I don't know what it is, something crazy that we all kind of somehow like this type of role. But certainly it's great. And I think, again, we've got nearly 100 people here today, which is another great sign of that. But without further delay, we're going to move on to our second section of our event now, with our panel of experts that you can see here. We picked out some key subjects around digital engagement, workforce management outside of the contact center, intelligent routing that kind of links into what Martin was referring to earlier with AI, and then finally we couldn't not talk about this, given that we've got Ileana here, but we're also going to refer to what I'm sort of terming as Uber scheduling. So you might refer to it as something different, but certainly very, very current a topic for us as well. Okay, and now I've just unmuted myself. There we go, brilliant. Don't know how I did that. We're a little bit tight for times, but I'm going to try to carve out some time at the end for Q&A as well for the panel experts. And this time, let's see whether or not we can actually get people engaged. I don't know, Shiva, if you can help me with if people hold their hands up, that'd be great. Fantastic. Okay, so without further ado, let's make some introductions. Starting with Colin, which I know personally very well, and I'm sure many here do as well. Colin, could you give a brief introduction to yourself and around your background and experience, please?
Yeah, not a problem. Good afternoon or good day, everyone, depending where you are in the world. My name is Colin Whelan. I'm the head of workforce optimization at Hoist Finance. So I have 10 centres in 7 different countries across Europe that I look after. Been with Hoist just over a year now, and we work in the financial sector, helping people get control of their finances again. You may call us a debt collector, but we do so much more than that. Prior to that, I was working for Aspect Software as a senior solution consultant, focusing on the workforce optimization estate across Aspect, dealing with a lot of organizations from Google, Facebook, major banks, helping people get the best use out of their tool and engage the operations best. Prior to that, I was a consultant at the Forum, previously called the Professional Planning Forum. So I helped write the world's first and only degree in contact center management, which is run out of Ulster Business School. And prior to that, I had a number of planning roles in banks, holiday organizations. So I've been doing this for just short of 30 years. I'm probably the biggest planning geek you'll ever meet in your life. And hopefully I can share some of that experience and passion with you this afternoon.
Fantastic, thanks. And Colin, I see your hair is slightly changed from that picture, but you're looking sharp there.
Yeah,
so
I can't get dressed. What can we do?
Super excited about the next introduction, cool. For me, I've wanted to actually put a face to the name for very long, so I'm really excited about Jer joining us here today. I also think you've got quite a unique perspective, given your sort of mathematical and academic background. Jer, could you just give a quick introduction to yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon to you all, and I'm very glad to be able to join today. Thanks for the invitation. So I'm indeed a scientist, a mathematician with a PhD in applied mathematics in queuing systems, which in a way is like the theoretical framework of call centers. I'm a full professor here in Amsterdam at the Vrije Universiteit, and where I, as a professor, started with student projects back in '96 with data from call centers, which were printed at the time, which we had to scan to. So unbelievable how everything changed, and also Martin, of course, told us about that. So I'm interested in general in services. Especially healthcare, customer contact. So I have students, PhDs working on forecasting, scheduling, this type of things, and also the more theoretical sides of that. In 2005, because I really wanted to bring these scientific methods to the market, and I founded together with a PhD student at the time, CCMath. And with CCMath, we tried to bring, well, really these very smart methods to the market. So we make forecasting and planning software. So already some of the things that Martin mentioned about these profiles and intraday predictions was already part of our software. And next to that, we offer also trainings both online and on site. So we really try with CCMath to bring these smart, we call it next level WFM, to really bring the best methods, and also nowadays a lot of these AI methods to forecasting and planning. I think
Fantastic.
that's it maybe.
And one more call out for Jerry as well. So if you haven't already got his book, it's one of my ones that's always on my shelf. I'd highly recommend it for any workforce manager. It's a great book, great read. It's really very simple and very straightforward as well. Okay, I'm probably going to get your name. Probably going to get your name, movie. I'm gonna. Would you mind giving a bit of an introduction? Maybe also pronounce your name for me, because I'm such a bad. It's my kryptonite if I was Superman with names. Yeah,
all right. That's totally fine, Doug. Well, my name is Mubashir Sheikh. Very good afternoon to everyone. I feel really privileged to be in the company of such amazing leaders. I feel every day is a new learning. I've been part of the e-commerce for the past 5 years, especially in the Asia region, and a total workforce probably about 15 years into banking, Bank of America. Majorly, all the call centers being outsourced in India and Philippines, setting up with all those Fortune 500 companies. Many have been, majority have been into bankings, and then into healthcare, and then the current era of e-commerce, I would say. So I've been managing all the countries, especially across Middle East and Asia Pacific right now for Noon, and then have managed Walmart's India business known as Flipkart, which is again the biggest competitor to Amazon. In the workforce, I feel so workforce is not just confined to call centers and planning. It's the ideology that is imbibed in us that really helps us to take things to the next level by comparing scenarios on the cost, as Martin rightly said in his talk about the ENPS and the overall customer experience. So I've been managing that, and being a master's in economics, I try to run scenarios in order to come to a best conclusion, and always try to keep some flexibility available at my kitty so that we have the robustness going and making things simplify. That's the whole ideology.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of terming it. I often say that kind of our responsibility to workforce management often is taking complex items and simplifying it, and being able to translate that into something that anyone, whether you're in operations or in another area, that can understand that and make decisions off the back of. Yeah, dead right. Simplifying is a great way of terming it.
Absolutely.
Last but not least, I think everyone would recognise the super brand that Ileana works for. Absolutely pleasure to have you here, and also to meet you as well for the first time. Would you mind just giving I probably don't need much of an introduction, but would you mind giving a bit of an introduction and a background to your experience?
Sure. Thanks so much, Doug, and hi, everyone. Yeah, as you said, my name is Ileana Zdravkova, and I currently work for Uber. I'm the head of workforce management for the EMEA region. I've been with the company for about 2 years now. And prior to that, I've worked in contact centers my whole life, my whole career, in all fairness, in both captive and BPO companies. I did work for IBM for about 6 years. I see some of my ex-colleagues from Sutherland as well here. So I was director of workforce management for the EMEA region in Sutherland for 5 to 6 years. And as many people who currently are employed in WFM, I did start my career with being an agent, and then I had a chance to actually move to the magical world of workforce management, and that has been my day-to-day for the past 14 years. I'm super happy and grateful to have the possibility to speak to all of you today, and thanks so much for the invitation.
Pleasure. Okay, so great. So moving on to our first subject of digital engagement. I think we'd all agree that the future is online. In fact, maybe it's not even the future, it's now. Certainly, since the pandemic outbreak, from my perspective in banking, we've seen a big movement of people purchasing more online than ever before. And in Germany, by the way, that's a phenomenon, because everybody used to pay in cash. Digital transformation projects are there really to meet online consumer demand. But what does it mean to workforce management? I think when from the perspective of workforce management, often the aim is to remove low value or high volume demand from the contact center. And any change in demand, of course, means an adjustment to our forecasts. So it's definitely creating some disruptions, I guess, in the way that we plan. Colin, coming to you first, because I think you have quite a unique perspective, given that you sit on the sort of the vendor side, but also on the operational, and you've sat there as well. It seems to me that the WFM solution providers they're only really just starting to dip their toe into the digital world, and which kind of leaves operations to bridge the gap between the customer needs and their software functionality. Hoist obviously has a very strong digital proposition. How is this affecting your capacity planning, and what's your view on workforce management as best practice to help bridge the gap?
Yeah, no worries, my friend. So you're right, we do have a very strong digital agenda, and we want to give customers the ability to choose how they engage with us. That is the most important thing moving forward in customer experience. Let's not funnel customers into a way that suits us. We've got to be open to let them do that, to engage with us when they want to and how they want to. Well, also, because of the business we're in, the customer is making the effort to engage with us. It's our responsibility, it's our duty of care to listen to them. We deal with very vulnerable people in all societies, all across Europe, so we have to make sure that we're listening to them when they want and how they want. But as we know, with digital experiences, AI, SMS, sometimes we have to elevate that piece to the next level. The complexity grows, and simply we have to put that in front of an experienced, skilled human being. So to do that, we need to try and guess what's wrong with our digital channels. We need to predict where we're going to have gaps in our digital capability that we're going to need to mop up with our normal contact center business. As Martin showed before, even though calls have dropped, they're not going away. But what they are going to do is specialize. They're not going to be the generic low-hanging fruit. So that shift that Martin referred to earlier is really where great workforce management professionals are trying to control the dials of a large cockpit of our operation to predict when we need to support our digital channels, but still being there for our synchronous engagements like chat, SMS, voice, etc. And understanding the needs of that, as I say right now, I think that's the gap that I'm seeing in the industry, because we're seeing the vendors come out with opportunities and great innovative ways of planning for one chat, more than 2 chats, 3 chats, email, etc. But the bouncing in a true omni-channel environment from the channel of choice with the context of what's been said so far is where we need to fill the gap.
Yeah, I'd agree. And it comes back to that human element as well, doesn't it? Just as you mentioned there, Colin. Yeah. Ileana, I'm going to pick on you next, because I think obviously Uber started in digital, so you've not really gone through a digital transformation. How do you kind of perceive how it? Do you see, for example, big fluxes in demands, and how do you in Uber effectively respond into that? Is it kind of a real-time thing, or are you reforecasting?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Indeed, we did start with quite a bit of things, and absolutely we do have and see fluctuation. As you can imagine, we have different types of business that we support, and some have a bit more intraday shifts in volumes than others. So there are multiple options that we are exploring. Obviously, we are looking at also intraday reforecasting. How do we answer to that demand? Any innovation or automation that can come into mind as well. So exploring again different possibilities, similar to what Martin, I guess, said earlier. Of course, when you're introducing something new, you are trying to take a bit of a slower approach, pilot it in some areas, then see, adjust if needed, and then redeploy. But yes, definitely that's something that the company is looking at.
And Jer, from your perspective, would you agree with what's been said so far? And what are you hearing in this space in terms of how things are changing from a forecasting perspective?
Well, it's within forecasting. I mean, what we're experiencing is something completely new. So in forecasting, you always need statistics on previous events. So it's a matter of how to pick up quickly new shifts in channels and doing this. And that's all about what statistics and machine learning is about. In general, these new machine learning techniques, they use lots of data. Yes, and of course, usually in call centers, you do have lots of data. If there's one area in which there is ample data and high quality data, it's in call centers. Yes, if you go, for example, to healthcare, there's way less data. But still, if you want to pick up, if there's some change in trends, you have to pick it up, and it's about making the algorithms do that really quickly. I mean, that's a challenge. I guess it's the same for Uber. If there's some event happening and there's more demand for taxis somewhere, you have to pick it up, adapt your pricing. In call center, it's the same. You have to pick it up and then do something with your flexible workforce.
I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because it does link back to what Martin was saying there. That with this, I guess, digital makes things, or the need for things to be that much faster. So therefore, we need the tools to be able to do that, because the human brain is getting to the point, or at least where we just can't contend without it. I think that's.
And if you build it in software, you only have to do that once. You have to think about it once. Of course, with CC Mod, we do give trainings, but I mean, it's so much more efficient in a way, if I'm allowed to say that. If you build it in software, something really smart, you can get the smart people together, build it in software, and then you can copy it as many times as you like. So, and I think that although there's, of course, lots of good software solutions in call centers, I think there are many more opportunities to build more smart solutions. And we see like real-time managers doing things where we really say, well, this is not the right thing to do, to say it nicely, but where smart software, and that's exactly what Martin already indicated, smart software might really help you. Martin, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I mean, take a current thing of which Ileana will have some interest. Uber Eats, for example. Who would have prophesized the growth this year in home delivery? Yeah, and serious competition that have come out of nowhere and grown 30-40% in the States, with an incredible responsive way of understanding demand, translating that into services. But if you look at it through the lens of resource planning, how the heck do you estimate how many people you need on the road to deliver that food? There's no precedent for it. And so one of the weaknesses of machine learning is it requires a lot of relevant data to get those things up and running, of which it's almost real time and changing as we go. So there are, I mean, that over dramatizes the problem we've got in call centers, but it does illustrate one of it, which is that we can obviously need to become reliant upon algorithms which require stable data in even times. But when things get rocky, we've still got to have an ability to see what's changing and then get up to speed with it. Otherwise, we're definitely going to be headed in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and that's why we have, they call that understandable AI. So we need to understand the outcomes of the algorithms to be able to make our adaptations or to give the input. If you do not understand, if it's some kind of a black box, then there's no, you can interact with it and understand the outcomes. Yeah, definitely.
It's incredible. If you think of Moore's law, technology is developing, it's doubling in its capabilities every 2 years. So we talk about millennials not so much having no patience, as you say, Doug. You've got children the same age as mine. They won't even know what the word patience means. So when we digitize,
it's so true.
it's going to be as Martin says, we won't have a benchmark because it's a new, exciting horizon we're hitting as it gets faster and faster and more options, which is why we have to bridge with common sense and what we know in the past and what we can understand with it.
Absolutely. Maybe coming to you. So I know we're going to touch upon this a little bit later, but I guess you live in this world, right? So from an e-commerce perspective, what sort of advice would you give to people that are kind of going through this digital transformation and how they might need to adapt to the way that they're working their plans for this?
One of the major challenges that we find, especially in e-commerce, are the events. And I'm sure Ileana would definitely agree on that. The day level, or I would say the intraday level peaks or the kurtosis from the economics point of view. So whenever we have this specific kurtosis in a day and the skewness of the volume in certain days, especially during the end or the beginning of the month, we know that my demand in the entire month is going to be, let's say, X, but during those events, it's going to be 2X. And especially when I'm focusing on my intraday, it's going to be 4X or 5X. Now, even though we have implemented the AI technology, the challenge is I would know what is the manpower that I would require. But the problem is, would I be able to deploy it? If I'm able to deploy it, what is the direct effect on my cost? So that's the hard line where we have to take a step, a hard call, where to ensure that, okay, even though my X, the peak, the kurtosis is going to be 2X or 3X, my capability and its direct impact on my cost is going to be 1.5. And we try to find a shift with scenario in my different patterns and try to find a break-even point where my cost is actually trying to match with the expected KPI that I'm trying to deliver. And where my, just for an example, let's say if I'm expecting an 80% service level, that if I want to move my service level from 80% to 85%, what is the impact on cost? My cost impact would be possibly be 20%. So a 20% impact on cost, just a betterment on 5% of service level is something where the leadership at the would be a bit skeptic. But yes, if the impact is, let's say, okay, 10% betterment with a 15% cost increment is somewhat negotiable. So we have to find that sweet break-even point by considering all the aspects that goes in to build a model, whether it be an AI or whether it be planning the resource. Because at any given point of time, we are looking at, let's say, from a logistics point of view, Amazon is planning to have the drone deliveries. But with such kind of peak, would they be inclined to invest in 20,000, 50,000 drones to have those sudden spikes catered to? Similar for Uber Eats or Uber as a transportation business. So we have to find a way, and the moment the organizations increase their size and their business, in the initial phase, they definitely give more impact to the customer experience. They want the customers, because this is where they really want people to have a very, very high engaging score and very high engagement in order to ensure that, okay, there's a trust factor which is built with them. But once they grow, especially if you try to contact Microsoft or the iPhone for any kind of return or on any kind of product, you will know what difference is I'm talking about. And when you're trying to engage with an Amazon, especially with a direct voice or maybe a WhatsApp, you would know the difference, because these companies are now the market leaders. They know they have a specific set of control, a monopoly on the customer, so they can give the experience a sideline a little bit so that they can manage their cost perspective as well. So these are certain parameters that we have to look forward, what goes in, and the final decision with the scenarios that, okay, these are the inputs that we are agreeing upon, and these are the impact that we are ready to sacrifice.
Yeah,
I think
the other cost or the other benefit.
Yeah, go ahead, Martin. Yeah.
The other bit I put into there is to say, let's talk about the 80 to 85% on an SLA. One of the key drivers on that is, does the customer care? that's incredibly important, and particularly to put it in the frame of this year, with the length of queues that people have had around a voice, there has been some forgiveness from customers, understanding that. Are we at a point now where that forgiveness is wearing thin?
I think so, yeah.
There is an interesting thing on customer behavior this year, which is that we've all been jolted out of it's not really loyalty, it's our habit of always only going with certain brands, and we've now tried lots more. If you combine that with other data that says you've only got to have 1, 2, or 3, depends, bad service events before I leave, attrition is a particularly important, significant point at this point. Forrester, for what it's worth, just saying maybe a migration of up to 30% of marketing budgets into loyalty programs and customer service, because now the game is all around keeping customers and loyalty rather than winning more in a recession. So big deal. So to the point that's just being made there, which is highly significant, mucking around with the scenario and saying what gives, a vital input into that is, does it matter in this context from the customer's point of view? And the things that are still sitting at the top, by the way, are fast and efficient and least deviation from outcome. And maybe I'm prepared to wait a bit, or is that even specific to certain topics? So I think we don't often go and ask customers those specific kinds of questions. We go for much more general feedback from customers, but I'd have thought that's another vitally important input into this modeling process.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think that workforce management typically is maybe guilty on occasions of just looking at your numbers and not realizing what we're actually providing is a customer service. So I think that's a really, really good point. Actually, probably a good one to end this particular topic on. I think we could probably speak about this topic all day, but some really interesting conversation there. Let's move on to the next topic. So here at the Global Workforce Management, we're really big believers that workforce management principles, they can be applied to nearly all sectors and verticals. I myself have had a chat with a planner, believe it or not, who is using workforce management method in a diamond mine. So instead of agents, it's diamonds running down the conveyor belt, which is blows my mind a bit. And I know that Shiva, I've had conversations with Shiva where he's talked to universities around how you could build a capacity plan for student intakes. So the possibilities are endless. I was meant to do a poll, wasn't I, for the first question? I forgot that one. So let's see if I can adhere back to the structure. Shiva, could you put up the poll number 2, please? I'm interested to see what experience individuals here, attendees here, have had in terms of contact center experience workforce management experience outside of the contact center. Can you put that poll number 2, please? See if it works.
Yeah, yes, one minute.
No worries. This is where I'm meant to fill in with the awkward silence with something.
Okay, so I'll just display the questions, since system was not able to accept all the long questions.
No worries, that's fine.
What I will do is I would show the questions in the slide. Then also, we'll ask, we'll invite all the participants to participate, answering the questions. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's fine. Well, if the polls are not working, let's move on, because I don't want to break the flow of the conversation. So that's not a problem. So with this in mind, Joe, I think you're probably a good person to come to first in terms of this particular category, this particular topic, because I think you even said to me that you have been running recently some calculations on COVID for the healthcare sector. In that particular type of, it's very current, obviously, with the pandemic that's going on. What do you see in your view? Because you've got a foot in both camps in terms of the contact center and healthcare. What do you see the sort of differences in the way that you need to plan or how to operate workforce management in, say, healthcare?
Well, perhaps the first thing to mention is that I think call centers are much more fun. Let's of course, healthcare,
right now for sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly not fun to be a customer of healthcare, certainly not nowadays. So that's definitely the case. And so what are some? So actually, I've been asked by a national center that does redistribution of COVID patients between different regions in the Netherlands to make basically forecast of the required capacity. Yes, and I think there are a couple of big differences. In the first place, capacity in healthcare is way less flexible than in call centers. Yes, and there were just stories about how some companies scaled up their operation during COVID. In healthcare, this is what happens more in healthcare. It's like, well, what also sometimes happens in a call center. If there's more inbound traffic, then more email get delayed. So it's like the regular care that gets delayed. And because the capacity is less flexible, and certainly in the Netherlands we have a very optimized system, but not optimized for fluctuation. So I think this lack of flexibility in all ways, in all senses. So nurses are like people who do not work in a hospital, but only for cardiovascular care, etc. So it's very specialized work with very little multi-skilledness, very little flexibility in the schedules, little flexibility to scale up. So and we're heading for a disaster, not so much because of the current patients, it's all the delayed care that is way bigger. Yes, and one of the reasons why I think call centers is more fun is also because and I think I can say that here. So I hope there are no doctors around. But doctors have so much powers, but doctors are used to look really short-sighted. They're trained to look at the patients in front of them, and they don't see the global picture. Yes, and they are often in charge. So it's very hard to convince management, doctors of smart solutions. They really think that they are also good managers, and they hopefully and I think they're usually very good at curing people, but they're not so good as managers. So that's, on the other hand, there are similar techniques. And when we are forecasting, we see similar patterns. For example, also the number of patients arriving at hospitals, it shows intra-week seasonality. You have like the flu, so intra-year seasonality, so all kinds of things you see in call centers. You also see it in healthcare. Yeah, so it is an exciting area to work with. It's of course life-saving. Sometimes call centers are as well, if you think about emergency call centers. But I think call centers are more fun, but perhaps things are converging. When we're talking to AI, there's a lots of things happening in healthcare. Also, the position of the doctors is changing. People already know what they have, and they get to the calls to the doctor's appointment. Yes, so I think in a way. And nowadays with COVID, I mean, I've seen the numbers. Of course, there are way less people that go to the hospital, but there are so much more e-health consults, and that's all. That's all call centers. So there's a huge overlap between the two areas.
You've touched upon actually something that I think is really important. And it actually, I mean, you've termed it in as in that doctors don't necessarily make good managers. And what that strikes me is that I think sometimes it's very easy for us as workforce management analysts to kind of get stuck in our spreadsheet, or not spreadsheet, but there's the talking technology, but you know. Say again, sorry.
Stuck in our plans.
Yeah, exactly. And what we forget is that it's really important that the people that need to make the decisions or act off the back of our plans trust our plan and get it and are engaged. And I think that you're experiencing. I mean, we're lucky in contact center because we've had it for 20-30 years, so it's therefore kind of understood. But in healthcare, you're kind of almost having to carve the way in that trust. That this can benefit you and this can make a big difference to the way that you work.
Yeah, and they think like doctors say, oh, there are again these managers that say something about it, but then you see these for example, intensive care doctors really taking suboptimal action. They're only thinking about their IC, but they're not seeing the consequences for cardiovascular care. And you would think also there's lots of AI data in hospitals, but much of the decision making is not based on data, on solid analytics. It's very much a power of doctors against each other. So I think also there, introducing more data, more numbers, more analytics will help improve rational decision making. But of course, I mean, there's less competition in hospitals. We have, depending on the country, it's organized at a national level. So the incentives are very different. And I'm not saying that we should all more commercialize healthcare, but that certainly explains some of the differences.
Yeah, absolutely. Mubi, I think you've got a unique perspective on this as well. So from an e-commerce perspective, I've long believed that the end-to-end holistic planning is kind of also another really big item for us in workforce management to get a handle on. Certainly in the e-commerce market, providing that holistic solutions, I guess, would be really beneficial. What's your experience in this space, and what would you say, for example, would be the right approach to say planning for logistics or warehousing problems, because these have big impacts to the front line as well as the overall customer experience, I guess. Yeah,
absolutely. So the basic that we start with is, let's say every customer is expecting a faster delivery nowadays, and any companies who are able to manage that, that has become a new norm. So in order to ensure the faster delivery, the number one thing that we can, that comes to the mind is increasing manpower. Now, the option should be given to premium customers, okay, with a nominal fee or, the initial period to gain a momentum. But what happens in a longer term, as I mentioned previously, because of the skewness of the volume, it is very, very difficult to have a balance between an amazing customer delivery experience, a faster delivery experience, at the same time to cater to the events. So we know that if we are managing or if we are planning our resources on the peak, then we know the utilization is going to be very low, even though the customer experience is going to be really fantastic, the NPS and everything. But at the same time, my cost would also shoot up very high. Now, are the companies would be inclined to go ahead and take that decision? Most probably not. So as Martin said, that we have to find a balance between 80 to 85%. So yes, 80 to 85% customers, if we are able to acknowledge in the mid, by standardizing their delivery timeline, 3 days or 4 days, or between 3 to 5 days, and we know we will be able to cater to 80% of the customers. The remaining 20%, as the Amazon and most of the e-commerce most of the e-commerce companies are doing, they're charging a premium for it. In order to ensure you want faster delivery, give me a premium, so that the extra, or I would say the low utilization cost that the company is bearing to have that higher experience is, is returned in terms of revenue. Now, the major problem with most of the big players, even when we talk about Walmart, Amazon, Toys R Us, many companies, the data in order to analyze the information, what is happening on the real time, it's not that readily available. Even as a manager, anyone who is interested to know, okay, what's been happening month on month, even though they have a big team of WFM, Power BI, or multiple softwares, they would really struggle to have the data being implemented on the table, right when you need it, the critical information. You have to have that dependency on your team. Now here the ideology comes into picture. Whether we take AI into effect, and as we know that AI right now is not even generalized. It has not even come to a level where we can say, okay, it has a general intelligence. It has a bit of softwares, bit of intelligence, a sort of codes that we have put to specific sections of commands, and it only deals with those specific aspects. So when we are talking about such high, robust amount of data processing, at our fingertips to take decisions, especially for long-term planning, ignoring the short-term consequences that might impact our NPS or a slight bit of experience that gets impacted basically. So that availability of data is very, very crucial. And when we talk about the data perspective, any software, any ideologies, here's the manpower comes into picture. I'm sure Jer will agree on this part. We have millions and millions of data sets. Now, in order to analyze, the system has to go back, analyze the millions of data. But what we are not doing, and this is prevailing in majority of the organization, that we are not making alias tables where we are converting the data sets into a monthly or a weekly and a daily, and then running our queries on the daily level so that the time is faster. So these are small changes that we have to look forward in terms of planning, in terms of getting the data availability, finding the barrier of the high utilization and or the low utilization, and the cost aspect in order to ensure that we are running optimum. Of course, we can't be perfect. We're all human. Everything is designed by human. But what we can do is, by creating scenarios, taking small steps at a time, we can try to move towards improvement. And at the same time, if the testing phase, let's say we have done a testing for 5% or the 10% of our business, where our success rate has not been that great, we can always come back to our previous old ways and move on with the same old logic until we find a new way to do things better.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's interesting as well, because I think, again, it's something that I found myself falling into the trap of, in terms of at least the contact center, and kind of not realizing that a lot of the demands that I see, say, let's use the example of who I work for in terms of a bank, a lot of the demand that we see is as a result of failure that's resulted in the back office. And I guess that's the same, isn't it? So a lot of the demand that you'll see on the front line in e-commerce might be, where's my package? Where's my delivery? And if that logistic side is not in sync, or in terms of the back office is not in sync with the overall plan, then we're leaving big holes, for sure. So I think it's a really important point to make, and certainly I think it's a possible future for how the workforce management team becomes quite holistic in an organisation. I'm conscious of time, and I was going to talk about intelligent routing, but I think I'm probably going to skip this one with time in mind, because I really want to spend some time on this Uber scheduling that I referred to at the start. And we've got obviously Ileana here, that's an absolute expert. I'm sure after 2 years in this space, just setting you up there for some great discussion, I'm sure. I think we'd all agree that Uber has disrupted pretty much not just the way that we take taxis, but also like the way that we deliver food, as we mentioned, the Uber Eats, but also the way that people work as well, with this gig economy element. So today, Uber drivers can wake up in the morning and they alone can then decide to turn on the app and go to work. Now, this is quite an alien concept in contact center, a bit scary actually. Do you think the principles of that type of way of working can be applied in the contact center? And if so, how do we even go about doing that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's a different way of thinking, right? It's not your standard contact center habits. So here's the thing: the idea of dynamic scheduling and applying machine learnings and algorithms to advance the scheduling process in contact centers is definitely not new, right? Many WFM professionals have spent a lot of time, countless hours, working on how to incorporate this in our day-to-day, but in my mind with several goals in mind. One of them being, how do we ensure that contact centers become a more attractive place to work? where contrary to what we are usually considered as standard, agents are actually given the possibility to choose a shift pattern, whether that's different working days or hours, and that flexibility being one of the value propositions for the company, right? And I think this is where you can see the synergies with what you mentioned at the beginning of the overall business model that Uber has used. Picture an environment where contact centers are the place of choice for so many employees, and they're benefiting from the flexible scheduling and the better work-life balance. Quite a few things for us to consider to make this happen, though. And looking from a more practical and tactical standpoint, obviously technology that would enable all of that. And Uber has, as a company, built its own software and technology to have that in place for the main part of the business. But when it comes to contact center, it's the tech, and also how do we support that real-time demand? How do we enable that shift bidding? Talking about the EMEA environment as well, I think that there are quite a few things that we have to consider from a regulation standpoint, legal requirements that we have in every other country. In the usual in-between shift breaks, overtime allowances, in which country that's legal and in which that is not, time off, VTO, and how do we also set up that workplace to enable all of that opt-in, opt-out type of scheduling and functionality. And as I said earlier, I think that there are few goals that are that can be achieved. Obviously, the second one is hitting higher efficiency, and I think that Mubi spoke about a little bit about that actually earlier. But having the possibility to cater to the peaks of your M or your bell curve throughout the day, without sacrificing hitting your efficiency targets, I think here is crucial, and that's obviously dependent on your arrival patterns. But the technology would allow for our agents to opt in or out from certain shifts or intervals during the day. Having said that, how do we achieve it? A work from home environment, I think, and the new reality we are at right now is the perfect time for us to test few new things, I would say different concepts. And I think that, again, from a regional standpoint, that would make a lot of sense from thinking about the workplace constraints and some of the legal details around that. So that would allow more flexibility for both agents and employers, and so many companies will have people working from home right now. So that's the time to test it. And just to finish a little bit here, like contact centers will always be a challenging environment to work in, and that's why we're all here, helping our organizations to better engage the employees, and by having more engaged employees, actually achieving a better customer experience. So.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I've long believed that you look after your employee who looks after your customer, and this key thing here is quite a simple concept, but quite powerful. Often a company we want to provide the best customer experience, but we've got to think about the people that are actually providing that customer experience. And if they're happy and engaged, then that makes the big difference. I think it's fascinating. And by the way, I'd agree as well. The home working, the lack of commute, I think that's the big difference, right? That can make this type of thing work. Where you've got maybe even like these small 15-minute blocks that people can jump on because they don't have a commute. And that sort of falls into a lot of things that we've been talking about in terms of that volatility around digital transformation, and it's almost like it's planned and somehow managed to link that up. That's incredible. Colin, what just moving on to you, Colin, from this perspective in terms of the scheduling space, do you see Hoist kind of going ever down this kind of unique, or what's your perspective on it?
I want to bring those two last questions together. We talked about bringing workforce management into other areas outside of the contact centre. Because if you think about what it is, a core and a true value, it's industrialisation of our workforce and the ability to do that on one side of the coin. But as Martin said earlier, on the other side of the coin, it's about engaging the people we've got to understand how we can make their lives better, the work-life balance, commission-based, whatever that looks like. So when you balance both of those, then if we take away the word contact centre and just say business, then we have other areas that have skills, know our people, are security cleared if required. We wouldn't mind that extra hour to jump on. So, you know what, we need to, as you say, stop thinking like we used to. Stop putting ourselves inside these little boxes of limitations completely, and open it up to our colleagues. The ability to book a schedule on your phone is where we are now in the industry. So why is it just the people we have in the contact centre, where I've got someone in back office or someone in legal or someone in training? They're good enough to train our people. Why don't we give them an extra couple of hours at Christmas? And then you can look outside of your company, things like students. Students are having a tough time, locked in buildings at the moment. Let's give them something to do. Let's give them a couple of hours training, and we might really limit the work they give them. But that really is going to take the edge off our super skilled people. As Martin said before, people we have are going to move up into an elevated position of expertise, and we can utilise, whilst we haven't got the technology to fix everything in our low value, high volume demand, we can give other people opportunities to engage, be part of something, and fundamentally put an extra few euros in their pockets when it suits them. So I completely believe it is exactly going to be one of the best outcomes of this entire pandemic, is that we break that mentality. We had to change the rules. Home working's been around for years, and people are not home workers, they're working from home at the moment, so there is a slight difference. But you know what, we've got a great opportunity here. Let's just keep pursuing it and do some really innovative stuff. As you say, for our people, broaden that out to be more people in the gig economy, the 0-hour contracts, when it helps them to help us. Just got to find the right demand to give them in the easier way. And I know there's a lot of companies out there who help get the work to the people. I want to mention Aspect here, even though I'm not on commission on often no more. But I know Aspect actually added that as a functionality a couple of years ago for that kind of thinking. A lot of customers struggle to understand how it fit in. But I reckon now, 18 months, 2 years down the line, people will get it, and you'll see more and more contact centres or customer businesses, to better phrase, I'm sure Martin's got the correct phrase to use. That's where we need to get to.
Well, certainly I know that the big, the Microsofts, the HPs, even eBay I saw as a judge recently doing it, using third-party gig organisers like Limitless. I think there's absolutely a percentage of your resource requirements that flow out of that kind of workforce, with those kind of lifestyle decisions that they want, with the kind of profile of the person. And even pre that, I was always a big fan of social communities where customers help customers, because the passion is there if you want to do that. And I think that's an obvious thing to tap into. Then in terms of what's going to happen between this unexpected but most welcome decision that home working doesn't mean that you can't control people and they can still be productive. Hey, guess what? That going back to then office, because I do miss my people, my friends, and I think that there is a bit that really works very well face to face. So I think a lot of the development work, the orientation work, the performance management will probably be done in the 2 or 3 days that we bring them back into the office, and then they can go back. So as a working assumption coming forward, depending on how comfortable we are, we'll probably have the majority of the workforce, and I would exclude newbies and outbound sales, interestingly, don't do very well virtually. They do much better when they're physically in a team, or people on disciplinary, but exclude that from your resource pool. You've got a lot of people who will be anything from 1 to 4 days at home, with probably that recognition that they can be that much more flexible. And again, as a subcomponent of that, people who will have children and the schedules that are driven out of managing a family. So with all of that, you actually add in a significant percentage of flexibility if you offer it to them. As Colin absolutely rightly said, that's the new way that we do things. And suddenly you're then dealing with, you've then got a very interesting way of dealing with those damn spikes that turn up whether they're expected or the complete unknown unknowns, to quote somebody famous on that particular point, combined then with hopefully the rise of self-service and proactive. And actually, you've got some really interesting flex now built into the whole model, which wasn't true before.
And go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I do think the challenge of all this is it gives flexibility, and I think that is great. On the other hand, you want to have a guarantee that you can meet the service level, and on the other hand, you want probably your employees also want a guarantee that they can have a certain minimal income. So they love some kind of flexibility, but not all types of flexibility. I've seen US call centers where agents were paid by the call, and if there were too many agents, they just left the call centers because there was nothing to earn. So these people, they quickly leave the company because there's no guarantee that they can pay the rent or the mortgage by the end of the month. So I think we have to come up, and of course there's lots of legal boundaries as well, but with a model that kind of gives that balances. There are positive side to it, but that avoids the negative sides to it.
I agree, and I think that's why companies, and I can't remember the other two, I'm not trying to push limitless, but I think that's why we need these organizations, because they take the logistical problems of that away and allow companies to plug straight into it. And I don't see that changing immediately in the future. Secondly, I don't see them taking over the entire resource capability, because that model has got issues in the way that you've talked about. It's incremental and supplemental, I think. By combining perhaps different parties, you can do something. Yeah. So there, I don't think the problem we can build the algorithms. The thing is how to make it work. What's the right model?
Yeah, very true. I'm conscious of time, and I think we're already 3 minutes over. So I'm going to have to. Big learning for me. Make sure not have such meaty subjects. Maybe make them a little bit smaller. But thank you very much, Martin, for absolutely fascinating AI presentation. For the panel experts as well, really appreciate your time. It's been some fantastic, really insightful discussion there. Shiva, with time in mind, I'm going to move straight back to you to wrap up. I think we're losing people left, right, and centre, but we've still got 71 there, so that's good.
You're muted.
Thanks, Jack, for taking the session forward. It has been fantabulous and great learning, insightful. I see that at the group, like we have multiple groups, especially for the EMEA, APAC, ANZ, and North America and Latin America. So all of them are, some of them have joined here, some of them could not join because of the time difference. What we would do is, we're going to make this as an edited video, and we're going to upload in the YouTube channel. And also, we would make this as a kind of white paper or in a kind of documentary where people would get benefited out of learning from each one of you, right? So we would want to make that and circulate it to people. And there are other questions where we could not answer. We will have those questions shared, and probably we can answer them, and then maybe in the LinkedIn or like one of the groups that we would do that. That's great, and I really amazed to see kind of ideas, kind of thought processes, and kind of discussions. It's been phenomenal. I really enjoyed, and this is the first event in EMEA. Many more events to take place. 2020 has been a blessing for us, and we all got together virtually, and we belong to the same family, and looking forward to learning from each one of you. Martin, thank you so much for taking your time. Some of them asking your presentation. If you permit,
yes,
you can.
Please. If you organise the distribution of that, anybody is very welcome to it.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for permitting that, and thank you so much for taking your time out besides the busy schedule. And Colin, it has been fantabulous learning from you. Ileana, great learning from your organizations, and Mubi has been a fantabulous sharing and share amazing academic sharing and a lot of thought processes. I see that yes, there's a need that where university should have WFM course as part of the course. In fact, I've been talking to multiple universities and B schools to have WFM as a great subject, mandatory subject for the business students, because I see that none of the students have been learning anything about WFM. Like moment they pass out, they get to learn from zero, right? So I've been in for it. So let's create kind of education programs in the area of WFM. And in fact, next month we have a international quiz program where we are expected to join about 500,000 people all over the world. And we have NICE is sponsor for that. They said that they want to give it goodies and giveaways for the winners. And we have set up teams where the judges and the jury team to assist them, and also we want to encourage WFM knowledge sharing and professional networking. And we want to reach out to everyone, all the audience. You've been very patient listening and wonderful sharing your questions, and it's been a fantabulous having you with us. Looking forward to seeing you, each one of you. Thank you so much, all of you, for taking your time. I see that it has been a fantabulous event. We'll start with many more events. And looking forward to speaking to you, looking forward to networking with each one of you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day, everybody, and have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.